If this story moved you, you are not alone. This is what we do here, real story, real emotion, story that stay with you long after the video ends. Please subscribe now so you never miss one. Hit the bell so every new story comes straight to you. Like this video, it helps more people find stories that matter. Drop a comment below. What moment in this story hit you the hardest? The next story is already on its way and it is unlike anything we have told before. See you there.
Nobody in the palace talked about it openly. That was the rule, always had been. Smile for the cameras. Stand straight. Say nothing. But on that cold Tuesday morning, something happened that broke every unspoken rule the royal family had ever lived by. Prince Louis was 6 years old, small for his age, with bright eyes and a laugh that filled whatever room he was in. Those who worked closely with the family said he was the most spirited of the three children, curious, fearless, and deeply loved. His mother, Princess Kate, called him her sunshine on difficult days. Even the palace staff, trained to remain neutral, smiled a little wider when Louis was nearby. That Tuesday, Louis had been brought to a small private gathering at a residence connected to the royal estate. No press, no cameras. Just family, or so it was meant to be. These smaller gatherings happened a few times a year. They were supposed to be safe, quiet, but something went wrong. The details of what exactly happened that afternoon remain tightly controlled. What is known, pieced together through sources close to the household, is that Louis found himself in a situation that left him visibly distressed. He was seen afterward being held tightly by a member of staff, trembling, his small face pale. A woman who had been present hurried from the room. Doors were closed. Voices dropped low. Camilla had been at that gathering. Now, before anything else is said, it is important to understand who Princess Queen is in the context of this family. She is not a woman who raises her voice without reason. She is not dramatic. She is one of the most disciplined, most respected, and most quietly powerful figures in the British royal family. She does not make demands lightly, so when Anne made a demand, a direct, personal demand, people listened. She reportedly contacted a senior member of the king's personal guard, not through a formal letter, not through an aide, directly, personally. That alone told those who knew her exactly how serious this was. The guard said later, quietly, to someone he trusted, that he had never heard Anne speak with that kind of controlled urgency before. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was precise, measured, and absolutely certain. She wanted action taken regarding Camilla. What exactly she asked for has not been fully disclosed. But the nature of the request made clear that Anne believed Louis had been placed in harm's way, and that the person responsible held enormous power within the family structure. Someone many people would be reluctant to act against. That is what made this moment so extraordinary. Because challenging Camilla, the Queen consort, the woman beside King Charles, was not something done lightly. She had her allies, her influence, and the protection that came with her position. But Anne had something too. She had her history, her loyalty, and whatever she had witnessed or been told about what happened to Louis that afternoon. The palace, as always, remained silent in public. Curtains drawn, statements prepared. A careful calm stretched over something that was anything but calm underneath. If you have never heard this story before, stay with it. Because what unfolded in the days that followed would shake even the most loyal members of the royal household and force a reckoning that had been building for years. He had stood in rooms where history was made. He had heard conversations that would stun the public. He had carried secrets like stones pressed against his chest for years. But when Princess Anne's call came through that afternoon, a key sat down. The guard's name was Robert. That is not his real name. but it is what he will be called here to protect what little privacy remains around this story. Robert had worked inside the royal household since his late 20s, quiet, professional, deeply careful. He was not easily shaken. He had been standing in a corridor near the East Wing when his private line buzzed. He answered, expecting a routine message. What he heard instead was Anne's voice, calm, precise, and carrying that particular weight that only comes when someone has made a decision they are fully committed to. She told him what she needed. She did not frame it as a request. Anne rarely did. She stated it as a matter of necessity, as something that needed to happen not because of personal grievance, but because a child had been affected. A specific child. A child she loved. Robert listened without interrupting. That was his training. But even as he kept his breathing steady, something shifted inside him. Because what Anne was describing, the incident at the gathering, Louis's distress, the presence of Camilla in the moments leading up to it, was not a small thing. It was not a misunderstanding or a family squabble dressed up in palace language. It was a pattern, Anne told him. Not just this one afternoon. A pattern of behavior that had been allowed to continue because of who Camilla was and because of the careful ally. And because of the careful, strategic silence that had settled around the king's wife like a second skin. Anne had watched it for some time. She had said nothing publicly. She had watched and waited, believing that the right people would eventually see what she saw. That someone closer to Charles would quietly course-correct things. That had not happened. And now Louis, 6 years old, trembling pale, had become the moment Anne decided that waiting was no longer an option. Robert asked her one question. He asked what she wanted the outcome to be. She was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, deliberate, choosing her words the way a person chooses each step. When walking across ice, she said she wanted Camilla's access to certain private family spaces reviewed and restricted, done through proper channels, quietly, without drama. She was not asking for a scene. She was not asking for a war. She was asking for a child to be protected. Robert understood the weight of that ask. To act even quietly meant navigating a landscape where Camilla had deep roots. The king adored her. Any move that appeared to target Camilla would risk being read as an attack on Charles himself. And yet, Robert had seen Louis that afternoon. He had not been in the room, but he had been in the corridor afterward. He had seen the child being carried by a staff member, face buried in her shoulder, body stiff with a tension that does not belong in a 6-year-old. He had seen the staff member's face too. A woman who had worked around children for years, not easily disturbed. She had been disturbed. Robert took 24 hours. He spoke to no one. He thought about his career, his family, the oath he had taken when he first entered service, and then he made his decision. He would act, but he would need to be more careful than he had ever been in his life, because the moment this became known, and in a palace, things always became known, there would be consequences. The question was not whether the storm would come. The question was whether he and Anne had built something solid enough to stand in it. He was about to find out.
Hi everyone, welcome back. First of all, thank you so much for watching this part and coming back for more. This story personally means a lot to me because it is not just about royals or palaces. It is about a child and about the one person who had the courage to speak up when everyone else chose silence. In this part, you are going to understand that Anne did not make this decision overnight. There was a long, quite painful background behind every step she took. Let's get into it and let's understand this story the way it truly deserved to be understood.
She had watched it for 18 months. She had said nothing. She had waited, believed that someone, somewhere closer to the king, would see it too. No one did. And so, when the moment finally arrived, Anne was not acting on emotion. She was acting on evidence to understand why Anne moved the way she did. You have to go back further than that Tuesday afternoon. You have to understand what she had been observing for years. The slow accumulation of small moments that, on their own, could each be explained away, but together formed a shape that could not be ignored. Anne had always been protective of the Wales children, not in an overbearing way. Her love was steadier than soft affection. It showed up in the way she positioned herself at gatherings, in the way she noticed things others pretended not to see. And she had noticed that Camilla's relationship with the children was complicated. Not cruel, not openly malicious, complicated. There was something in the dynamic that Anne had watched harden over time, a subtle coolness. A particular way of speaking to the children that was just a fraction too formal, as though they were guests in a house that belonged to her. Rather than grandchildren she had inherited through love, Kate had noticed it too. Those close to Kate said she navigated it with quiet, diplomatic grace, always composed. Always gracious, but strategic about when and how her children were in Camilla's presence. Without her there, the problem was that Kate had not been present that Tuesday. She had been attending a scheduled commitment, planned weeks in advance, publicly noted. Louis had been brought to the family gathering under the assumption that it would be a calm, supervised afternoon. There were staff present, other family members nearby. It should have been fine. It was not fine. What happened in that room has not been publicly disclosed. What is known from multiple sources carefully pieced together is that Louis became upset following an interaction with Camilla. Something said or done, or perhaps withheld in a moment when a child needed warmth and received something else entirely. The effect on Louis was visible, undeniable. A child known for his boldness and laughter had been reduced, in minutes, to something small and frightened. Anne had arrived shortly after. She had not been in the room, but she walked into the corridor and saw Louis, and she saw the expression on Camilla's face, not guilt. Those present said something closer to irritation, the quiet irritation of someone who felt they had been made into a problem when they believed they had done nothing wrong. That expression told in everything. It told her that Camilla did not understand the weight of what had just happened, or worse, that she understood and had decided it was not her concern. Either way, the result was the same, and excused herself quietly. She went to a private room, closed the door, and stood at the window. Those who knew her well said that was her way when something moved her deeply. She gathered it inward first, processed it in the solitary silence she had always kept for herself. Then she made the call to Robert, but she did something else in the days that followed, something that showed just how seriously she was taking this. She reached out, carefully and discreetly, to two other members of household staff who had been present at various gatherings over the past 18 months. She asked them, in her direct way, whether they had observed anything concerning regarding the children's interactions with Camilla. Both said yes. Neither had reported it. Neither had known what to do, because reporting something about the Queen consort without clear, provable harm was a path most people in that environment would not walk willingly. Careers had been quietly ended for less, but they told Anne, and Anne kept what they told her close, adding it to everything she already knew. She was building something. Not a scandal for the public, something internal, contained, directed, an argument that could not be dismissed. And somewhere across the palace, in the warm, carefully arranged rooms that Camilla moved through with the ease of someone fully settled in her position, there was no awareness yet that the ground beneath that ease was beginning to shift. How do you walk into a room and tell your brother, the king, that the woman he loves with his entire soul may have hurt his grandson? How do you hand someone that kind of pain and still call it love? Anne had no script for this moment. There was no gentle way in. There was only truth. And truth, in that family, had always been the most dangerous thing of all. Robert moved carefully. That was the only way to move in a world where walls had memories and every corridor had eyes. He made quiet inquiries, not accusations, not formal complaints. Soft, professional questions directed at the right people. The kind that could always be explained as routine if anyone pressed him. He reviewed access logs, spoke to 2 senior household staff under the guise of routine security reviews, cross-referenced dates. What he found did not give him one single damning event, but it gave him a constellation of small things that placed beside each other, formed a shape he could not deny. Anne had been right. There was a pattern, and it was not nothing. But both of them knew pattern alone would not be enough. Not when it came to Camilla. Not when it came to the king. Charles had fought for decades to secure his relationship with the woman he loved. He had weathered public judgment, press cruelty, the weight of his first marriage's collapse. He had finally arrived at a place where Camilla stood beside him officially, completely. In the role the world had once said she could never hold to bring something like this to him, something that implicated her in the emotional harm of his grandson. It's not simply presenting facts. It was asking him to hold 2 things at once that he had perhaps never been forced to hold together. His love for his wife and his love for Louis understood this. It was why she had gone to Robert first, to build something that could not be waved away as jealousy or family tension. But eventually, Charles had to know, she chose a Sunday. Charles tended to be more himself on Sundays, less armored, less surrounded by the machinery of kingship. She requested a private meeting, keeping the nature of it vague. She simply asked for time with her brother. He agreed. They met in a private sitting room in the late morning. Tea was brought. No aides present. The fire was low. The light through the windows was gray and soft, the kind of autumn light that makes everything feel slightly more fragile than it really is. Anne did not ease into it. That was not her way. She told him about Louis, about the afternoon, about what she had seen in the corridor, about the look on Camilla's face. She told him about the staff members she had spoken to, about the pattern she had observed over 18 months. She held his gaze. She gave him everything, steady and clear, in the way that only a sister who has known you your entire life can deliver the hardest. Truths. Charles was very still. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. At one point, voices inside were raised briefly, then went quiet again. When the door finally opened, Anne walked out first, her face composed. Her chin leveled. Charles came out several minutes later. He looked, the aide said, like a man who had just been told something he had been half expecting for years, and had spent years hoping would never arrive. He did not speak to anyone. He walked to his study. He closed the door. He stayed there for a long time. What he felt in that room, what he decided, is known only to him. But what followed in the next 48 hours made one thing clear. Anne's words had landed. Certain, quiet, private arrangements began to change. Camilla's access to specific informal family spaces was reviewed. Certain gatherings were restructured. Nothing announced. Nothing dramatic. Just a careful redrawing of invisible lines from the outside. No one would see it, but inside that household, where everyone notices everything and says nothing, everyone noticed, and Camilla noticed most of all.
Welcome back, everyone. Really glad you are still here. In part 4, you saw Anne do something incredibly difficult. She sat across from her brother, the king, and told him a truth that no one else was willing to say out loud. That moment was not easy, but she did it anyway. And now in part 5, the effects of that truth start to show. Camilla begins to feel the shift. Cat finally learns what happened, and inside the household a heavy silence spread and stays. one that speaks louder than any words could. I really want you to stay till the end of this story because the final part will stay with you. Let's continue.
She didn't receive a warning. No one knocked on her door. No one sat across from her and said, "Things have changed." They didn't have to. Camilla felt it. In a corridor, in a gathering invitation that never came, in the eyes of a staff member that now looked slightly past her shoulder. Instead of meeting her gaze, she felt it and she understood exactly what it meant. Camilla was not a woman who panicked. That was one of the things that had always served her well. She had lived through decades of public hatred, press cruelty, and the complicated grief of being seen as the reason a beloved princess had suffered. She had survived all of it with slow, strategic patience. But she was also not naive. She felt the shift within days. Perhaps sooner, it was not anything said to her directly. It was smaller than that. A gathering she had expected to attend that now had no clear invitation. A corridor that suddenly required a different kind of coordination. A staff member who had always looked her in the eye, who now looked slightly past her. Small things. The kind only someone paying very close attention would notice. Camilla paid very close attention. One of her long-standing household allies came to her quietly, not with details. Details were too dangerous to pass. But enough. Enough for her to understand that something had been said to Charles. That Anne was involved. That it concerned that afternoon with Louis. She sat with that. For a long time, those close to her said she was not visibly angry. She was careful. She thought through what she knew, what she didn't know, and what the safest path forward looked like. She had not survived everything she had survived by reacting loudly. She chose to be still. For now, but beneath the stillness, something had shifted, and those closest to her could see it even if she would never have named it out loud. Camilla was, for perhaps the first time in a long while, uncertain, and uncertainty in that environment was its own kind of danger. The household read it the way animals read weather, as a signal that something was about to change. Meanwhile, Kate had been told not everything, not directly, but through William, who sat with his wife one evening after the children were asleep and told her what had happened, what Anne had done, what Charles had responded to. Kate's reaction was not dramatic. Those who knew her said she went very quiet, the particular quiet of someone who has been carrying a weight alone for a long time and has just discovered they are no longer carrying it alone. She asked William several careful questions. She listened to the answers. She nodded slowly. Then she asked about Louis. William told her Louis seemed fine. Children that age move on. They forget the shape of what frightened them, even if they carry something invisible of it forward. Louis had gone back to being himself within a day or two. Loud, bright, unaware of the quiet storm. His one pale afternoon had set in motion. Kate cried a little then, not loudly. Just the release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. Anne, for her part, said very little about any of it in the weeks that followed. She attended her engagements, carried out her duties with the crisp, unshowable discipline that had defined her public life for 5 decades. At a family gathering in early December, she and Camilla were both present. They were civil, polite, the practiced warmth of 2 women who understood each other completely and had no intention of making a scene, but everyone in that room could feel it. The invisible architecture of the household had been quietly, permanently rearranged. Camilla held her composure beautifully. She always did. But the lines had been redrawn. And unlike everything that had come before the press, the public, the years of judgment, these new lines had not come from outside. They had come from within. And within was the one place Camilla had always believed she was safe. That belief was no longer fully intact. And in the silent language of that world, that mattered more than anything that would ever be said out loud by the time winter settled properly over the estate. Life on the surface looked exactly as it always had. Engagements were fulfilled. Photographs were taken. The family appeared at the right moments, smiled at the right angles, and the world received its careful, curated image of unity and grace. Underneath, things were different. The changes that had been quietly implemented held. No public announcement was ever made. No statement issued. The press picked up nothing concrete, only the faint, sourceless suggestion that inner dynamics had shifted. The kind of rumor that surfaces in gossip columns and gets dismissed as a speculation. It was not speculation. Robert, the guard who had answered Anne's call and chosen to act, was reassigned to a different post several months later, framed as a standard rotation. Those who knew the full story read it differently. He accepted the reassignment without comment. He had known there would be a cost. He had decided it was worth paying. The two staff members Anne had spoken to remained in their positions. They were careful. They said nothing more. But there was something in the way they moved through their days afterward that people close to them described as lighter, as though something that had pressed on them without a name had finally been acknowledged. Even in silence, Anne herself never spoke publicly about any of it. No interviews. No gestures that could be read as triumphant. She simply continued being who she had always been, disciplined, precise, loyal to the institution and to the people within it. She believed deserved protection, but those who watched her closely said something was slightly different about her in the months that followed. Not softer, but more settled. The way a person looks when they have done something difficult and right, and are living with the quiet peace of knowing they did not look away when looking away would have been so much easier. Charles was harder to read, as he always was. His public appearances with Camilla continued. His affection in those appearances was visible and real. Love, when it is that embedded in a person, does not disappear because of difficulty. It simply lives beside the difficulty and finds a way to breathe. But he had heard what Anne told him. He had sat alone in his study with the full weight of it. And he had acted quietly, carefully. Without drama, that was its own kind of answer. Louis turned 7 in the spring. He had a birthday party with his siblings and a cake with too much frosting that he ate enthusiastically and got all over his shirt. He laughed so hard at something George said that he slid off his chair. He was, by every account, completely himself, loud, bright, full of the particular life force that had always made people around him smile wider than they expected. 2. Whatever had happened on that autumn afternoon had not broken him. Kate watched him at the party and felt something she could not have named, but that lived somewhere between gratitude and grief and deep, uncomplicated relief. She held it quietly, the way she held most things. Then Louis spotted her watching. He ran over and threw himself into her arms with the full weight of his small body. She held him tight. This story will never be confirmed by official sources. It will never appear in a palace statement or a royal biography authorized by the people involved. It lives in the space between what institutions say and what people inside them know. That space is often where the truest things reside. What this story is really about, at its core, is not royal politics, not palace power, not the complicated dynamics of a blended family under permanent public scrutiny. It is about something far simpler than all of that. It is about a woman who saw a child, frightened, and decided, without hesitation, that her own comfort was worth less than his safety. It is about the kind of love that does not announce itself, that does not need applause or recognition, or a story told about it. But sometimes, the story gets told anyway. And sometimes, that is exactly what the world needs to hear.
If this story moved you, You are not alone. This is what we do here. Real story, real emotion, story that stay with you long after the video ends. Please subscribe now so you never miss one. Hit the bell so every new story comes straight to you. Like this video, it helps more people find stories that matter. Drop a comment below. What moment in this story hit you the hardest? The next story is already on its way and it is unlike anything we have told before. See you there.